Yes, Kenya. Tamu sana, tamu sana, tamu sana, yes. Ruto's government is on record accusing Uhuru Kenyatta's government of having borrowed massively. And they have been saying we are where we are as a country because Uhuru Kenyatta borrowed massively. So his government is not going to borrow. He rather tax Kenyans than to borrow. That's what William Ruto has been telling Kenyans. So the big question is it true Ruto's government is not borrowing? Is it true that Ruto's government is not borrowing? The answer is a very big no. Ruto's government is borrowing massively. And in the 9 months Ruto has been in power as the president, he has borrowed more than Uhuru Kenyatta did borrow within the same duration. He has borrowed more than Uhuru Kenyatta. And if you look at the projections of William Ruto's first term, assuming he will be lucky to reach 2027, this government, according to Business Daily, will have borrowed 3.6 trillion, according to the projections by Business Daily. Ruto's government will have borrowed 3.6 trillion in his first term. Uhuru Kenyatta, in his first term, borrowed 2.7 trillion. So you are seeing that if you compare Uhuru Kenyatta's first term and William Ruto's first term, William Ruto will have borrowed more than Uhuru Kenyatta. Let's have a look at some figures here before we continue. Kenya Kwanza borrowing spree in the last 9 months. Kenya shillings 120 billion loan from South Korea borrowed in November 2022. Shillings 408 billion loan borrowed from the Afrexim Bank in May 2023. 52 billion borrowed from the bank in April 2023, from World Bank in April 2023, 220 billion borrowed from the domestic market in June 2023, 68 billion syndicated loan borrowed from commercial banks in the last week of April 2023, 50.42 billion borrowed from the domestic and external market in September 2023, 65.21 billion borrowed from the domestic and external market in November 2022, 55.1 billion borrowed from IMF in December 2022, 21.85 billion borrowed from the domestic and external market in October 2022, 162 billion borrowed from IMF in May 2023. Total loans borrowed since September 2022, Kenya shillings 1.2 trillion. So in 9 months, Ruto's government has borrowed 1.2 trillion. In Uhuru Kenyatta's first term, 5 years, Uhuru borrowed 2.7. Ruto in only 9 months, 1.2 trillion. And Ruto is telling Kenyans that instead of borrowing, he rather increased tax for Kenyans. So you are seeing that he's, he's oppressing Kenyans on taxes and also borrowing heavily. Let's dig deep with a very interesting story here again. Business Daily. William Ruto adds more to debt in first 6 months than Uhuru Kenyatta. As of March this year, President William Ruto's administration has borrowed shillings 17.4 billion more than his predecessor in his first 6 months in office. President William Ruto's administration has borrowed shillings 17.4 billion more than his predecessor in his first 6 months in office, appending the plan to go slow on debt. Treasury data shows that the new administration tapped loans worth shillings 452 billion in the 6 months to March, which is more than the 434.6 billion that is its predecessor borrowed in the same period a year earlier. That is as of March. Ruto economy. Ruto administration to borrow shillings 3.6 trillion in first term. President William Ruto's administration is targeting borrowing shillings 3.6 trillion in his first 5-year term, appending his plan to go slow on debt. At shillings 3.6 trillion, the borrowing is more than the shillings 2.7 trillion that Mr. Kenyatta chucked up in his first term and shillings 1 trillion that the late Mwai Kibaki borrowed in his last 5-year term. That's the truth of what is happening. So Ruto is borrowing more than Uhuru Kenyatta did. And if you look at a projection of Ruto's first term, assuming he will reach 2027, he will have borrowed 3.6 trillion. Uhuru Kenyatta borrowed 2.7. So Ruto's government is borrowing more than Uhuru's government and also more than Kibaki's government. So all these talks that we rather tax Kenyans than to borrow, those are all lies. That's the truth, ladies and gentlemen. So you are seeing again how Ruto and his team, they are taking Kenyans as fools. In broad daylight, they consistently cheat Kenyans. So William Ruto has no problem on cheating Kenyans. Or rather, cheating Kenyans is nothing to William Ruto. And there are so many instances where Ruto has lied and cheated Kenyans in broad daylight. We still remember recently, he promised that starting June, gas was to retail between 300 to 500. He later turned around, made a U-turn, and said Mutungi. An open lie. The housing levy. Ruto on record admitted, or rather made it clear, that it was not a tax. Right now, as I talk, it is confirmed tax. Ruto just introduced a new tax bracket. Look at the pledges, the promises he made when he was campaigning. All of them have not been fulfilled. A leader who can lie in public in broad daylight, and he says no problem with that, ladies and gentlemen. It boils down to integrity. Ruto is not fit holding a public office. That's the truth, ladies and gentlemen. So as Kenyans are being pushed to the wall on taxes, They must know that as they are being pushed, the government is borrowing heavily. Let's meet in our next analysis. If you want to support our channel, I've pinned my number on the comment section. Contact me through the number or feel free to channel your support to the number. God bless you. God bless Kenya.